After a strong finish in Iowa, Senator Marco Rubio entered Saturday night's New Hampshire debate as a target for his GOP opponents. And under the intense pressure, he initially stumbled. But late in the debate, he was responding to tough questions with at least one really important, thoughtful response.
It's a difficult issue because it puts in conflict two competing rights. On the one hand is the right of a woman to choose what to do with her body, which is a real right. And on the other hand is the right of an unborn human child to live. And they're in conflict, and as a policymaker, I must choose which one of these two sides takes precedence. And I've chosen to err on the side of life. I would rather lose an election than be wrong on the issue of life.
Okay, so I don't agree with Mr. Rubio on this point, but I actually thought that the response represented exactly what any candidate has to do. After they win a primary, they're going to have to pivot in a general. And what he did there was say, this is actually a hard question. It's one that puts into question two competing values. I recognize that Americans see that there are two competing values, and then I'm going to come down on my side.
But he didn't give you really an answer there, right? He didn't say that I'm, pro-life with the necessary exceptions, which I believe in also, right? Health, incest, rape. He didn't say that.
Well, he did in between. Yeah, he did. He said there's competing ones, and then he said in this, and then he was like, but then he came back with his strong, like, I don't know, I feel like that felt stronger to me than the kind of just the pandering piece that sometimes, and I don't mean just around abortion, I mean on a wide variety of issues where you're going for like just the primary. There's tape. People will play your answers in the general election.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was his best moment in the whole evening, and I think one of it was, first of all, I do like, as a professor, I like the idea of competing goods.
Yeah, right. Yeah, maybe that's what it is.
A lot of these things are real tough questions in politics. But also the point that look, it's going to be a tough decision. He's going to have to hold his ground on a certain thing. You know what? I'm going to make some trade-offs. I'm going to make some trade-offs in other things. I can't make a trade-off in this. I thought it was a good pitch that he made, especially to conservative Republican voters.
Which is interesting because in the previous debate, I think he sounded more like that he was sort of in charge of the policy that he was talking about. I don't agree with him on any of it, but he sounded a lot stronger. He sounded a little more thoughtful and a little more passionate. But all of that was lost last night.
Well, I think it was in the first debate with Megyn Kelly. She asked him about what he believed in abortion, and did he believe that abortion should be allowed in the case of rape or incest. And he gave the worst answer for a general election.
Yep.
Right.
And so now this answer allows him to have a little cover if he does get the nomination, can say like, oh, I've softened.
Yeah.
So outside of the first 10 minutes, he had an okay debate.
Yeah, but the first 10 were...
The first 10 minutes was the headline, and it really killed him. And so this was sort of buried beyond the headline.
There was another moment, I have to say, because when I'm making this point about I need, on both sides, I just need a grown-up in charge. There was like this weird thing that happened around the selective service question. I just want to play a little bit of the sound here.
Tell me what you'd say to American people out there who are sitting at home, who have daughters, who might worry about those answers and might worry that the draft is reinstituted.
Well, the draft's not going to be reinstituted, but why, if women are accessing...
Should you just do away with it?
No, I didn't say that. You asked the question not about the draft. You asked about registering. And if women are going to be supporting...
for the draft.
But we don't have a draft.
Well, so that had been set up with, okay, now women can be in combat, so should they have to register for the draft? And the right answer, has been over the years, no, our daughters should not have to register for the draft. And each and every one of them was like, oh, yes, selective service women should register. And I was like, I wonder if they know what they're answering. It really was a question for me about whether or not there was an informational confusion about what selective service is for people who are planning to be the commander-in-chief. And it was distressing for me. Was I reading that moment wrong?
Specifically, I thought the moderator tripped up Governor Bush because she knew what he was talking about, and then she confused selective service with the draft, and they're definitely not the same thing. Right? As we know, selective service is something you register for early on at 18, and then if there is a draft at some point, you're eligible for the draft.
But right now, only men have to register for it.
My position as a Republican is, I do think it should be both. Right? I think it should be men and women at 18 should have to register because now women serve in the military. They're able to participate in combat. There's full equality, and we should keep that. We should keep that consistent throughout.
That's a relatively new position. Is my only point.
I think this was actually a bright spot in Republican party is trying to grow the platform when it comes to women, because, you know, Marco Rubio actually has consistently supported women in combat since about 2013. And that's been a really hotbed issue on the Republican side. And so they're actually being consistent. And I thought Chris Christie really nailed the answer.
He understood.
And he also is surrounded by a ton of strong women in the top levels of his campaign. He's always been great with women's issues. And so I thought he particularly did well there.
And you talk about Chris Christie and pivoting in a general election. Here's a man who hugs the President of the United States, and he gets pilloried by his own party for it. I mean,
but then in that debate, you know, a few months ago, he also said kind of horrible things about the president.
Absolutely,
so.
no, it's absolutely right. And what's interesting to me is that, you know, of the governors that, I mean, he had this really strong, passionate response to government and to being the executive, which no one really, even among the governors, really could.
He is the most in charge of the governors, right? He has something that Donald Trump has. He has that strength about him, but he's also a governor, so he brings a long time of making executive decisions. And I thought that contrast that he drew with Rubio again early on came out so good for him, and also the U.S. attorney experience that he has, talking about national security, talking about foreign policy. And I wish they talked more about foreign policy last night, because that is really what the presidency should come down to. Bernie Sanders, for example, never talks about foreign policy.
Oh, yeah. Well, Madeleine Albright was real clear about that yesterday.
Right.
Thank you to Boris, Elise, Basil, and Chris. You know they're going to be back over the course of this election season.